All right, and we'll just give people a few minutes to filter in. All right, so while the rest of everyone is filtering in, I just wanted to say hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good middle of the night, wherever you are. Welcome to the Long-Term Animal Research Seminar Series 2 of Fall 2021. We're going to continue this set of seminars with talks from Dr. Tim Bonnet and Dr. Sahas Barve. And before I introduce our speakers, I wanted to make just 2 announcements. If you're participating via Zoom, you should see the Q&A tab at the top or bottom of your screen. If you open that tab, you'll be able to type any questions you have, as well as see and upvote other people's questions. And at the end of the talk, I'll go through those questions, starting with the ones with the most votes. And then secondly, recordings of all the talks will be available on YouTube shortly after they conclude. So if you need to leave early or know others who can't make it today, this talk will be available. Both talks will be available for reviewing and viewing after they're complete. And so with that, I'm really excited to introduce our first speaker, Tim Bonnet. Tim received his PhD from the University of Zurich, where he assessed if genetic adaptation to environmental changes occurred on contemporary timescale, and if and how this affected populations' persistence. He has since held postdoctoral positions at the University of Zurich and the Australian National University, where he is currently a DECRA fellow. Tim is generally interested in recent genetic evolution and how it interacts with the ecology and life history of organisms. He's also developed statistical methods for evolutionary quantitative genetics in wild populations and has led several workshops on these topics on modeling in R. And so I'm really excited to hear more about his work today and learn how fast adaptive evolution is today. So with that, I will let you take it over.
All right, I'm sharing my screen. Thank you, Liz, for this nice introduction. Can you see it okay?
Yes.
Yeah. All right, let's go. So yeah, today I would like to give you a short overview of my work trying to understand how fast adaptive evolution is today. And you're going to see that mostly this work is made possible by the work, by field work, by a lot of field work, and spiced up by a little bit of statistics. So I think we're all aware that evolution is something that happens now today, although the general public may not have been aware of it just a few years ago. But I feel now we have more and more conversation with our friends and family about adaptation of pathogens and these kind of things. So we are increasingly, I think, aware of evolution happening in real time. The thing is, when it comes to things that are nicer than viruses, like more charismatic and animals and things we like, we don't know as much at all. And it matters a lot because lots of wild animal populations are threatened by a variety of environmental changes, be it climate change, invasive species, pathogens, or habitat destructions. And we know that some of them are definitely going to go extinct in the near future. Now, migration or phenotypic plasticity may help some of these populations to persist, although their environment is deteriorating. But in principle, at least, adaptive evolution would also be a way for these populations to adapt and persist on the long term. The thing is that we don't really have a good idea of how much of that is happening. So that's why I've been kind of fascinating with these questions for a few years, trying to understand adaptive evolution in real time today in wild animal populations. So the first thing to consider is how can we measure contemporary adaptive evolution? And certainly there are several methods, several frameworks. But the one I rely on is that of evolutionary quantitative genetics. And within that framework, we have this fantastic tool, which is Fisher's so-called fundamental theorem of natural selection. To put it very simply, this theorem states that the rate at which genetic responses to selection tends to increase fitness are equal to the additive genetic variance in relative fitness, which I'm going to write or say VAW probably for the rest of the talk. So that's a complex idea in a way, but you can think about it as if the ability to reproduce is transmitted from parent to offspring, then overall this ability to reproduce increase in the population, and therefore the you have a response to selection across all traits, across the genome, and so it's an integrative measure of adaptive evolution. I recommend reading a paper by Graffen in Journal of Theoretical Biology if you want to learn a bit more about that. Now, unfortunately, we know quite little about this in wild populations. So one relatively recent review found estimates from 16 populations of 13 plant and animal species. And here is the distribution of these values, and they don't mean anything really to you, probably numbers between 0 and 0.75, something like that. So here is a short thought experiment that I use to illustrate what these values mean. Imagine you have a population perfectly adapted to its habitat and evolutionary equilibrium, and on generation at T0, you're going to change its environment forever, so that the fitness of the population decreases by a third. If we assume constant adaptive potential, no frequency, density-dependent selection, nothing complicated, we can project the population size in subsequent generation with these two equations. Basically just saying the mean fitness increases based on the additive genetic variance in relative fitness, as stated by the theorem of Fisher, and then population size increases by the current population size time the mean fitness. And if you do that for the experiment, you get this graph where you can see the reference on the y-axis is 1, so it's the initial population size. And if you do not have any adaptive evolution going on, you follow the bottom line, VAW equals 0, which essentially shows you that the population is going extinct quite quickly because its population size is decreased by a third every generation. In contrast, if you have a VAW of 0.3, after only 2 generations, the population would have already recovered. So that's a bit, that's an arbitrary scenario, but it leads me to say that values of VAW above 0.3 are very large because they allow very fast population growth despite the environmental change. Values of 0.05 are still large because they let the population recover after about 10 generations. And below that, you have moderate values until VA of 1%, where you cannot really see anything going on after that. And so looking back at the review, we can see that this suggests that most value of adaptive evolution in wild populations are small, but you have some very large values. The average is also quite large. The median is small to moderate. The thing is that we are not sure that this picture is reliable because there were several issues with the way estimates were calculated. One big one that I'm not going to address today is how we measure fitness. That can be complicated in real situations where we have overlapping generations or missing data, for instance. But what's easier, or what I've been working on instead, is that you have non-genetic sources of similarity relatives, which may bias estimate of quantitative genetic parameters. And also that all these models, all these estimates come from models that were assuming Gaussian residuals or something like that, and they don't fit the data of lifetime fitness well at all. So in this work, I spent the last 3 years working on method improvements. So trying to fit models that would analyze fitness data and extract less biased estimate of VAW. So I used quantitative genetic animal models, controlling for various effects that may be confounded with the transmission of additive genetic effects. And more importantly, I worked on using models that will fit the distribution of fitness. I don't have time to get into mathematical details, but the idea is to use compound functions such as zero inflated over dispersed Poisson distribution, which gives in general very good fit to real field data of lifetime reproductive success. The only challenge there was that these type of models have several linear predictors, so they have several sets of estimates. And so a big task was to find how do we get from two sets of equations into a single value of VAW. But that's cracked, so that's done. And finally, the biggest problem I think in the literature so far was that we had too few estimates of VAW to have a good overview. And that's where I get into long-term animal monitoring, because all these people on this list, plus countless field assistants and other people, collected millions, literally, hours of data across several animal populations, and they all accepted to put this data together so that we could analyze them in a common framework. And so here are the 19 populations that I've included in what I'm presenting today. And yeah, together they represent 2.6 million hours of fieldwork only, without counting lab work or anything like that. So that's massive investment. And here are the results. So on the x-axis, you're going to see the values of VAW. On the y-axis, you can see each row corresponding to one of the population, and I'm going to show posterior distribution for the values. So for instance, we can see the BTM population, which are blue tits populations, as an estimate of VA of around 0.5, whereas the GTW has an estimate of about 0.1. So it's lots of information to absorb quickly, but the idea is that you see some large values, some smaller, some that are estimated too poorly to really say what's going on. But if we meta-analyze these numbers, we realize that at least 9 of the 19 populations exclude completely small values. The small values are not part of the confidence intervals. The median of these estimates is 0.1, which is 5 times higher than previously expected, known, sorry, and the mean is twice as high as previously reported. So because one conclusion we can take from that is because VAW captures the predicted net effect of selection across all traits, across the multivariate space of traits, it means that in some of these populations, at least half, traits must be evolving quite quickly by natural selection, which is interesting and means that we need to look more into what traits are happening. And also, these populations are not at adaptive equilibrium. They are probably experiencing environmental changes of some sort. No need to represent that. It's the same thought experiment with this initial drop in fitness, and we see how fast populations recover from it. And if we apply that to the empirical estimates I've just shown you, we see that about half the population recover from this big environmental challenge after less than 10 generations. Which, I mean, it's a thought experiment only. It's not meant to be realistic, but it shows you that adaptive evolution can be a potent force in these populations on short time scales. So in conclusion, we can measure adaptive evolution in real time, or like contemporary adaptive evolution, I mean, with the use of long-term studies of pedigreed populations. it helps to have models that fit the data better, and it seems that it really makes a difference on what kind of estimates we're getting. And the conclusion so far is that adaptive evolution will be much faster than previously thought, and that traits are probably responding quickly to selection. Thank you. I hope I haven't been too long. Happy to take a few questions if there is time.
Great. Thank you so much, Tim. That was really great. There are time for questions. So as people are formulating their thoughts, I will start with one. I'm curious if you have any thoughts or anything you want to say about the populations with and without the significant additive genetic variance in fitness. Like, are those without like just in more environmental variable, or is it something about generation time, or any other thoughts there?
Yeah, so we've done some exploratory analysis to try and find about that. Nothing is really conclusive, but obviously with 19 populations, it's a bit limited. We have only 19 data points to meta-analyze that. But some thought is that the duration of the monitoring is probably doing something, because if you have longer time periods, you may actually be losing some resolution on fast change that may be quite temporary, or fluctuations in the environment. Whereas if you have short time scales, time spans, you may by chance seeing something drastic just happening. So that would be one possibility. There is no obvious difference between birds and mammals, and that's about it so far.
Awesome. That's really great. So we just need long-term studies.
Yeah, we need 200 of them, and then we can ask interesting questions.
That sounds great. Just write that to all the funding agencies. Okay, I think actually that's a great place to stop. So thank you so much. And if anyone has other questions for Tim, please reach out to him. That was fascinating. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. So now I'm very excited to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Sahas Barve. Sahas received his PhD in ecology and evolutionary biology from Cornell University, and then completed a postdoc at Old Dominion University. Currently, he is a Peter Buck Fellow at the Smithsonian National Museum of Natural History. Sahas is an evolutionary ecologist who focuses on the evolution of morphological and behavioral adaptations in birds. He's worked with a number of different bird species, including old world flycatchers, birds of the Himalayas, and acorn woodpeckers, which he's going to talk about today. He's also very active in mentoring and outreach, and so I urge you to visit his website to learn more about all of his fascinating work. And so with that, I will let him take it away and tell us about the complicated social life of a hoarder, the acorn woodpecker.
Thank you so much, Liz. Thank you, Liz and Matthew, for inviting me to give this seminar. It's quite an honor because there have been so many awesome talks that I've listened to over the past couple of years through the seminar series. So thank you for keeping at it and introducing us to new studies. All right, so let's get going, and let me share my screen. Okay, so you can see it, right?
Yeah, it looks good. It's just not full screen yet. Yep,
yeah,
great.
There you go. So welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for going to my talk. I'm going to be talking about some research on the long-term study of acorn woodpeckers. And so I'm sure several of you watching may not be bird people. I guess no one's perfect, but acorn woodpeckers are a social species of woodpecker that's distributed along the west coast of the United States, but they also go through a large part of their ranges in Central America, and they go down all the way to Colombia. Everywhere they occur, they are associated with oaks. But all the research that I'm going to talk about today actually took place in this beautiful place, the Hastings Natural History Reservation in Carmel Valley, California. And most of it was done by Walt Koenig and more recently by Eric Walters. But I'm going to present research that has taken place over the last 50 years. And so 50 years of research is impossible to do without a large team of field assistants, volunteers, grad students, collaborators, and postdocs like me. So a lot of effort has gone into collecting the data that I'm going to talk about. So about 10 years before Alexander Skutch wrote his famous Helpers at the Nest paper. Frank Leach wrote a paper in 1925 in the Condor about the communism in the California woodpecker. Acorn woodpeckers were called the California woodpecker back then. And what Leach said was one of the most puzzling features of the nest building of the species was the fact that more than a pair of woodpeckers seemed to be interested in the proceedings. And so over the last almost a century, we've been trying to answer this question: why do some birds have more than two parents or more than two adults taking care of the offspring, a thing that we call cooperative breeding? And so why raise non-descendant kin? Why is that third individual or fifth or sixth or 10th individual feeding non-descendant kin? So in birds, cooperative breeding largely comes in two different flavors. One is a group of species that have helpers at the nest, where there are non-breeding adults who are taking care of the young and feeding the young. But then there are also birds that have what is called cooperative polygamy, where two females or two males may form a nest together. And the cool part about acorn woodpeckers is that they show both these behaviors. So in fact, in about the 50-odd groups of acorn woodpeckers that we follow at Hastings, we can have groups that are simple pairs, polyandrous groups where one female and multiple males breed together, polygynous groups or polygynous groups where multiple females and a single male breed together, polygynandrous groups. And all these groups can have one or more non-breeding helpers who are adults and can be both male or female. So acorn woodpecker groups are really varied, and that makes them really interesting to understand the evolution of cooperative breeding. So acorn woodpecker society, as I like to call it, is a network of territories spread out over the oak savanna of California, where each group builds and maintains what is called an acorn granary. These are huge acorn structures where individual acorns are stored, and these granaries can have hundreds to tens of thousands of holes. And adult acorn woodpeckers rely on these stored acorns, especially in the winter, when their favorite food, flying insects, are in low supply. So overwinter survival of adults is tightly linked to granary size and acorn crop in acorn woodpeckers. So today I'm going to talk about three projects that I have led as a postdoc, and not talk a ton about helpers at the nest, which is also a huge part of our research program on acorn woodpeckers at Hastings. So we are going to talk about how to win a granary, the socio-ecological drivers of cooperative polygamy, and try to understand what are the long-term fitness effects of cooperative polygamy in this really special bird. So let's start with the first part, which is how to win a granary. So like I said, acorn woodpecker society is basically built around these acorn storage structures or granaries, like we call them. And it's really important for any individual adult to become a breeder at a territory with a granary, because granaries are so important for their reproduction and survival. But of course, territories with granaries are limited. And so most woodpeckers spend several years as adults on their natal territory because they can't find a dispersal opportunity or can't inherit territory in their first year itself. So I guess one of the most important questions about acorn woodpecker biology is then, how do you acquire a granary, or which is the same as how do you become a breeder in the population? So to answer that, let's think of a simple example where there is one male and one female breeder. So it's a simple pair of breeders with 3 helpers, 2 females and a male helper. And then let's assume that the male breeder dies. Now there is pretty strong incest avoidance in this species. And so this male helper cannot become the male breeder in the group. And so what happens next is called a power struggle, where multiple coalitions of male helpers will descend on this territory and fight each other until one coalition beats all other coalitions. This power struggle involves a lot of posturing, a lot of calling, and also involves a lot of actual physical fighting, and often ends up with many individuals being injured. So, okay, so let's assume that the male died, and then there was this power struggle between all these 3 or more coalitions, and these 3 brothers won the power struggle. Now they're going to move in as the new male breeders at this group. And because these 3 males are unrelated to these 2 helper females, they inherit the territory as breeders, and they become co-breeders or joint nesters with their mom. Now, of course, because the male helper is now an unrelated male to these guys up here, the new breeders, he gets kicked out of the territory. So there are 2 ways to acquire a granary. One is to fight tooth and nail to win a territory when there is a breeding vacancy, or to inherit the territory by sort of waiting around for your opposite sex parent to die. So you can inherit the territory with whoever moves in next. But of course, we are getting ahead of ourselves because power struggles themselves are really cool sort of behavioral ecology spectacles. Sue Haddon in 1985 showed that power struggles can start within minutes of a breeder disappearing, and it's really incredible to think that these birds discover a breeding vacancy so quickly, and we really didn't know why or how they did that. And the most basic question we wanted to ask was, are birds flying around constantly to snoop on other territories to find these dispersal vacancies or dispersal opportunities? So to do that, over the last 4 years, I've been leading a project where we've been putting ultralight radio tags. These are solar powered radio tags on these acorn woodpeckers, and these radio tags talk to receivers that are present at every territory that we follow in our landscape. And so what we found was that there's extensive foraying by everyone. And so both helpers and breeders are flying across our study area every day. Each bird typically visits about 5 to 6 different territories. And these territories can be up to 3 or 4 kilometers, probably much more than that as well. So these birds are constantly moving around. Using this technology, we could finally study sort of the mechanics of power struggles. Because if you go to a power struggle site, if it's a big power struggle, there can be 30 or 40 birds from 12 different coalitions fighting each other. And so it's really chaotic. There's a lot of calling, a lot of fighting, and it's really difficult to read bands on birds that are fighting all around you. You can't even see all the birds, and tracking how long each bird is present at the power struggle is almost impossible. So we studied 3 female power struggles. So these are power struggles which were for a female breeding vacancy. And what we found was that these power struggle sites were visited by 13 female helpers, which we are going to call the warriors. These are birds that are directly fighting for the breeding vacancy. But also, we discovered that there were 23 breeders or males, basically birds that could not benefit from this breeding vacancy, also spending significant amount of time at these power struggles. And we call them spectators. So what we found was that all sex and status categories, so we have males and females, and within each sex, we have helpers and breeders. And so all sex and status categories visited power struggle sites, often from really far away. So we had birds spending 40, 50 minutes at a power struggle from over 3 kilometers away. What we found was that warriors did spend much longer at power struggles than spectators. These female helpers that were trying to win the power struggle spent a lot of time, some females even spending up to 600 minutes on multiple days, potentially fighting the whole time to win these battles. But interestingly enough, we found that spectators came from farther away. So these were either males or females who were already breeders at other territories. They came from further away than where the helpers, the actual warriors, came from, which was super interesting. And that spectators came just as frequently. So individuals who could not benefit potentially just came to watch a good fight, maybe. We are not really sure about that, but they came just as frequently as the warriors. So what we found was that acorn woodpeckers basically spend a lot of time trying to win really good dispersal opportunities. Some birds in this study spent over 40 hours at the power struggle site and were still unsuccessful in winning the territory. But we also found that there are these adult spectator breeders who are also spending potentially a lot of time and energy in gathering what we think is just social information, traveling to these faraway sites and spending time there. So this was really cool because we could use our newfound radio tracking technology to study a behavior that could not be studied otherwise through direct observation. So with that, let's move on. Now that you know how to win a granny, let's move on to try and understand what drives cooperative polygamy in acorn woodpeckers. So let's go back to our first example, where we had 3 females, a mother and her 2 daughters, who are now joint nesting with these 3 males, and so they have formed this polygenatrous group. But of course, how do they make it work? Why joint nest with your close kin when you could be a simple pair and monopolize all the parentage in every breeding attempt, right? So this is still a really important question to us. And cooperative polygamy sort of varies by sex in our population. Only about 78%. 78% of all the groups have only a single breeding female, while cooperative polygamy is much more common in males, and about 50% of all groups in our population have more than 1 male breeder, and some can have up to 8 breeding males. Up to 4 females can form a joint nesting coalition and have a communal nest together. And this female joint nesting is especially interesting because joint nesting by females is an exceptionally rare behavior in birds. And to my understanding, only about 8 species in the world actually show joint nesting where multiple females have a communal nest and raise the chicks cooperatively. So cooperative polygamy and polygynandry is really interesting because at the heart of it, the basic assumption is that every individual is still trying to maximize their own individual fitness, right? So they are doing this cooperative behavior, but at every breeding attempt, they're potentially trying to maximize the number of babies they have. And so this sort of highlights the intersexual competition, because polyandry is the best case scenario for females, where one female wants to mate with multiple males, so those males can then help raise her offspring and she can maximize the clutch size she can lay. But polygyny or polygyny is the best case scenario for males, right? So one male wants to breed with as many females as possible so they can all have his offspring. So why nest with a same-sex co-breeder when the exact opposite is your best case scenario? So to give you an example of to sort of drive home this point that individual acorn woodpeckers definitely care about whether they are direct parents for some of the offspring, at least in the nest, is the amazing behaviors they show by which they maintain parity or they maintain equity in the number of offspring they have. And so let's take an example of 2 joint nesting females. They are 2 sisters, Anna and Elsa. And so Anna is ready to lay eggs in the nest. So this is my little cartoon of their cavity. This is the tree. This is the entry of the cavity, and this is the cavity nest inside. And so Anna is ready to lay eggs, and she lays an egg. Elsa is not ready to lay eggs. She comes back to the territory, comes to the nest hole, and finds there's an egg, but she can't let Anna get a head start in laying eggs. So she takes the egg and either eats it or drops it outside the nest. So Anna comes back and finds no egg in the nest, but she lays an egg again the next day. Elsa is still not ready, drops it out again. And they keep doing this until Elsa is ready to start laying eggs. Anna eventually figures out and stops laying. But basically, females dump each other's eggs until all females are laying on the same day. And this becomes even more complicated when there are 3 or 4 joint nesting females. And these joint nesting females lose up to 38% of all the eggs they produce, trying to match the laying cycle with their joint nesting mates. So males do something a little more complicated for us to understand. We see alternating dominance of parentage in males. And so if let's consider a 2-male system where there are 2 males and a single female, generally we see that one male dominates any given clutch. And so that male will mate guard the female very aggressively and actively, and will end up having fathering about 65% of the young in that clutch. But the dominance switches between nesting attempts. And so if male A is the dominant bird in clutch A, male B may be the dominant bird in the very next clutch in the very same breeding season as well. But at the same time, male B is really interested in whether he has at least some skin in the game. And if you keep male B in captivity while male A is busy guarding the female and mating with her, after the female lays eggs, male B will go and destroy all the eggs in a clutch where he's sure he has no direct paternity. So they definitely care about whether they have they're reproducing or not. So that basically gave us enough encouragement to try and understand what may be the socio-ecological drivers of polygamy in acorn woodpeckers, because there has been a lot of predictions in literature about what may give rise to these potentially costly behaviors. One of them included the ability to acquire and defend high quality territories. So are co-breeding males or females able to acquire those high quality, big granary territories? If these co-breeding birds are able to take advantage of concentrated food resources like acorn crop years, where there's a huge acorn crop, or whether these joint nesting or co-breeding coalitions are just a compromise when habitats are saturated and independent breeding opportunities are limited. So what we we used our long-term data set on about 50 groups, about 900 group years of data on acorn crop, territory quality for each group for each size, and we used a bunch of different variables, and the population size over a fixed area as a surrogate for population density. And what we found was that resource availability, so acorn crop did not drive the frequency and prevalence of cooperative polygamy in males or females. Territory quality did, so males seem to be able to acquire higher quality territories when they are in a larger coalition. And both males and females likely co-breed more frequently when there is high population density and a low chance of independent breeding opportunity. So what we found was that basically whenever there was a power struggle and males were replacing a breeding vacancy, a larger coalition tended to win such power struggles more often, but this wasn't true for females. But for both males and females, at high population density, the mean number of breeders of any given sex was higher in both males and females. And so pointing to the fact that their social environment was driving the prevalence and frequency of cooperative polygamy in our population of acorn woodpeckers. So with that, let's move on to the last part of our talk, which is trying to understand the sort of the lifetime fitness benefits of cooperative polygamy in this species. So cooperative polygamy, as we have talked about already, is sort of an evolutionary enigma, because co-breeders are competing for fitness throughout their lives. This is very different from a helpers at the nest scenario, where most helpers disperse within 2 to 4 years, and so they may be giving up reproduction for that long. But cooperative co-breeders are competing to maximize individual fitness at every breeding opportunity. And so cooperative polygamy is a really interesting behavior to study the evolution of cooperative behaviors in general. And so previous studies have shown, and these are often short-term studies, have shown that cooperative polygamy is in fact a best of a bad job strategy, where individuals often have fewer offspring in the nest when they are cooperative, and cooperative polygamy may thus be a best of a bad job strategy in the absence of independent breeding. And so, given the prevalence of pair breeding as the norm in birds generally, cooperative polygamy has long been thought to be sort of a bad alternative. But it may be better than not having any offspring at all and staying back as helpers. But to truly understand the long-term sort of the fully realized benefits of any behavior, you need long-term studies where you can track an individual across their entire life and find out what the direct fitness benefits of a behavior are. And so let's go back to our example of this cooperatively polygamous group of 3 breeder females, where 2 female helpers inherited the nest, inherited the territory, and these 3 breeder males, where the 3 breeders fought a big power struggle and won the territory. And try and understand who has more direct offspring, an individual that is breeding in a cooperatively polygamous group, or an individual that's breeding as a breeder in the simple pair, where both the male and the female can monopolize all the reproduction that's happening in the nest. So for that, we put together lifetime direct fitness data. And here, direct fitness means the number of offspring that fledged, that were assigned using genetic paternity methods to these birds. And so we have direct fitness data, lifetime direct fitness data for about 500 individual acorn woodpeckers, about half male and half female. And what we found was that cooperative polygamy is definitely a short-term compromise in acorn woodpeckers. So both for males and females, a single breeding male and female have more direct offspring at any given in any given reproductive attempt than birds that breed in duos or trios. So I'm going to show you several graphs that look like this. Here, the y-axis is the number of offspring, and the x-axis is going to be the number of breeders. So one means they were the single breeder in the group, male or female, and these are duos, trios, or 4+ coalitions for males, and duos and trios for females. So going back, when it's a single breeding male or female, they always have more direct offspring than when males breed as duos or trios. But for females, co-breeding had similar benefits across their lifetimes. So co-breeding duos in females had mean reproductive lifespans that were significantly longer than single breeding females, which led to single breeding and joint nesting duo females having equivalent lifetime direct fitness. So females that bred as a duo had about the same number of direct offspring as a single breeding female. In males, the co-breeding is even more beneficial. So co-breeding males had longer reproductive lifespans, which resulted in longer mean nesting or more mean nesting attempts across their life, resulting in male duos and trios having more direct fitness than even single breeding males. And so what this tells us is that over their lifetime, cooperative polygamy is really beneficial in acorn woodpeckers. In females, it's actually as good as breeding on your own. And in males, it's actually better than being the single breeder in the group. And so this sort of questions whether we really need to invoke indirect fitness to explain the prevalence of cooperative polygamy in this population of acorn woodpeckers. So hopefully I've told you that acorn woodpeckers spend a lot of time trying to win territory and trying to disperse or become a breeder. That cooperative polygamy is in at least in some part driven by the population density of birds in any given area, but that these seemingly costly cooperative behaviors may actually be more beneficial than we ever thought. And long-term studies like ours are essential to sort of bring out these differences and to quantify the benefits of any behavior over a really long time. But going beyond the academic, acorn woodpecker research at Hastings and 50 years of it also means that over the years, over 150 undergrads have worked on the project, where they go out and look at birds and peer through their spotting scopes until their eyes go cross. They learn essential skills like carrying heavy ladders across the hot oak savanna, help us band and tag birds, and generally have really positive experiences with acorn woodpeckers. Over the last 4 years, these often undergraduate technicians have in fact become exactly that. They've become technicians as they work with our array of radio transmitters and radio receivers, constantly fixing Raspberry Pi computers, working with solar panels and car batteries. And being at one of the oldest research stations, biological research stations in the United States also gives us a tremendous opportunity to connect with the public. And so every year, scientists at Hastings Natural History Reservation engage with hundreds of citizens and students and tell them more about the ecology of the fascinating oak savanna of California. So with that, I'd like to end by saying that a simple observation made by Frank Leach of more than 2 birds feeding nestlings at a nest with 50 years of research is now a textbook example of the role of helpers in cooperative breeding, is telling us new things about the evolution of cooperative polygamy, but is also a really, really important side for the training and education of future behavioral ecologists and outreach about basic science to the public. With that, I would like to thank the National Science Foundation for supporting our research, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Wow, that was really great. Such a cool, fascinating system. I have a ton of questions, which I will ask if no one puts in the Q&A. So I hope that other people out there will also ask questions. But I want to start us off while people are typing. I'm curious with your part on the socio-ecological drivers of polygamy. I'm curious, how energetically costly is it for these females to like keep losing eggs and like also keep laying eggs? And does that explain why there are more groups with female singletons maybe than male singletons?
Yeah, that's probably right. There's definitely a bigger physiological cost for females than for males, potentially because they lose about 40% of the eggs they make. So that's probably the reason why males are male co-breeders are probably more common. Yeah.
Cool. Okay, I'm gonna ask another one then.
Mhm.
I can't remember if you said that. Are bigger groups more likely to take over granaries? And then following up on that, are there any group dynamics after they take over, if that's true or not true, to kick out extra females if it's best to only have like 2 females or 2 or 3 males, like for both sexes?
Yeah, that's a great question. So that's only true for males. So larger male coalitions tend to win power struggles more often. And the second part of your question, and so yeah, so having being able to win a power struggle sort of depends on whether you have same-sex helpers in your group that will want to go and fight with you at this power struggle, right? So that's really important for these birds. But we do not see any breeders of the opposite sex being kicked out to sort of maintain an optimal level. Joint nesting females generally want to have a polyandrous sex ratio because in the end, that would mean that there are more birds helping raise all their chicks. We've had a nest with, I think, 16 eggs with 4 breeding females, and so they want all the help. And so they generally probably don't. I mean, we don't think they ever kick out any birds who are potential breeders.
Great, thank you. Okay, so we have a question from Mark Hauber who asks, how does incest avoidance work in the system? How do you know when you're developing whom you're directly related from the bird's perspective?
Yeah, that's a great question, Mark. So the simple answer is that female birds don't inherit a territory until all putative opposite sex parents are dead or have disappeared. And so it may be that your uncle is the male breeder at the group, and your dad has died, but we don't see female helpers, for example, starting to breed until all their opposite sex parents are dead or have disappeared. And so that's the main way. There is incest, and I think about 5% of our groups show some level of incest, or at least where we know it's like the first cousin or a mom and her sons or something like that. So there is a significant amount of incest avoidance, but there is also some incest, and they basically wait until they're reasonably sure that they're not having an incestuous relationship.
Great, thank you so much. I think with that, we will thank you both for being here, and thank you for our audience for coming to listen, and tell everyone to be here same time, same place next week for 2 more fascinating talks on long-term study systems. So thank you so much to everybody, and have a lovely day.
Yep. Thank you so much.